Hi there, folks, and welcome to another episode of Talking Faith. It's good to be here with you, and good to be back here again with Johnny.
Yeah.
We're out in the big wild open, as you can see, out at the reservoir by Mugduck out here on a lovely day. Actually, it's a fantastic day for it. But I do hope, as ever, you've kind of settled yourself down, maybe grabbed a tea or a coffee to enjoy with us as we talk and reflect and just unpack different bits of Scripture together. And today we're continuing on looking at the armour of God that we find in Paul's letter to the Ephesians, right at the end of the book of Ephesians. So I guess without further ado, Johnny, what one are we thinking about today?
Yeah. So the next piece of the armour of God is the shoes of peace. The way that Scripture says it is, make sure your feet are girded with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. And I find that very encouraging, this concept of readiness, being ready for anything. And when I think of shoes, the one thing that kind of comes into my head is that concept of something that makes sure you're sure-footed, make sure that you can handle any terrain that comes up. And I'm not sure-footed. I don't know if you've known that from living with me for like 2 years now, Callum.
A little bit on the clumsy side at times,
Yeah,
just occasionally.
Definitely. I think maybe that's due to I don't have my good walking shoes are back home, so maybe that kind of impacts.
That's an excuse, okay.
Yeah.
Right. For walking around the house, good.
Yeah, exactly. But one thing we have realised when going out to film is maybe we'll be going down to maybe a bit of a difficult terrain to get to. I'll slip and I'll fall. When winter came not too long ago, it was icy everywhere. I almost slipped and fell quite often. It's something that's I'm kind of maybe a little bit prone to. So maybe this is why this stands out to me. Like making sure I've got like shoes that actually hold me in place, actually make sure I can stand firm as this passage is calling us to do. And for the Roman soldier, they had an implement to make sure that was possible. Their shoes were essentially able to handle any terrain because it had little spikes coming out of the bottom of it, so they could dig into the ground and they could hold firm, similar to like maybe a rugby player as they're on the pitch. And we're being a rugby player, and when you're in the little scrimmage, it's quite hard to kind of push the other team forward, and it would be much easier to fall over if we didn't have those studs going into the ground. And that's what the Roman soldier would have had, and that gave him the sure footing, or like the solid ground to be able to move forward with, or to stand strong with. And this passage is saying that is the gospel. And Paul has been writing to this church in Ephesus, and the whole, as I said 2 weeks ago, the whole first part of the book is talking about the gospel, and secondly, how to put that into action. And that's what he's trying to remind the church as they're standing firm, as they're going through difficult times, as they're facing spiritual warfare. He's reminding them of the gospel and how important that is to them. So when we think back to what Jesus did 2,000 years ago, the impact that has on us because he did it personally for us makes such a massive difference, because we look back and see Jesus has already done it all. So that gives us the strength and courage to be able to stand firm when difficult times come, because we realize Jesus is with us and he's for us. And it means even when we're moving forward, we can stand firm on that strong foundation as we tell others of who Jesus is by spreading the gospel. One of the things that the Scripture brings out when Jesus says a story about two builders, one of which is a foolish builder who builds on a weak foundation, which is sand. The other one builds on the solid rock, a wise builder. And that solid rock for us, that is the gospel of Jesus Christ, what he did for us. That gives us the strength to stand sure no matter what comes against us. It's those little spikes that hold us in place when times get tough.
That's fair. That sure-footedness that we get from the good news, from the gospel. How do you think that ties then to the idea of peace? What do we do with peace in the midst of that?
Yeah, I think peace is quite a strong statement, and I think it is something that we can rely on, because when Jesus died 2,000 years ago and rose again for us, like he brought peace into our life in two particular ways. Firstly, when it comes to our relationship between God and us, there was hostility there. We were sinful. We were trying to essentially rebel against God through our day-to-day actions, but suddenly this peace can come into our hearts. When it comes to our relationship with God, we don't need to try to be better. We don't need to try to be better than other people around us. We don't need to try to be good to please God. In fact, no, God works something through in us, and that there's a peace that comes in a relationship with him where we're no longer hostile to him. But then on top of that, we don't need to earn his favor. He has given that to us freely. That's the first stage of this peace that comes down into our hearts, because our relationship with God is restored. And that's kind of the key notion of peace, is this restoration of relationship where suddenly where there was pain and turmoil, now there's peace and calm. And that comes through secondly in a relationship with other people. People that I don't know about yourselves, but it's quite easy to have relationships that fall apart, and maybe there's quite difficult to fix it and repair it. So one of the places where that stands out to me is the story that we find in the letter to Philemon that Paul is writing. There's a relationship that's fallen apart, and that relationship is between Philemon and one of his former workers, a guy called Animus. And there's a bit of a dispute, which meant that Animus then went off to do his own thing, and Paul finds them as they're both stuck in prison together for believing in Jesus. And he writes back to Philemon saying how his life has changed through the power of the gospel, and to take him back and see how different his life has become. And that relationship then becomes restored. That is the important part of what we see in this scripture, is the fact that relationships that were once broken can be restored, and peace can come into those friendships or other things that maybe have broken apart. And that's what really encourages me when I think of the notion of peace and this gospel of peace, is because we see what Jesus did. And that means no matter what barriers are between us, when it comes to maybe cultural, language barriers, or even barriers where we've fallen apart, they can be completely mended and bring us together so we can forge forward one future together as a family in Christ. No matter our differences, no matter where we've fallen apart in the past, we are united in this peaceful relationship that grows and continues to challenge us to be peaceful to one another constantly.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I do hope for each of you, you found that valuable to reflect on, that sure-footedness, this kind of sturdy ground that we find in the gospel and the good news, and how that is a source of peace for us, an example of peace for us to be to others, to build peace with one another in our lives. So we'll catch you again next week for some more Talking Faith, but thank you.